Many Christian teachings on the subject of divorce are built on the concept that Jesus violated the law of Moses. This is entirely not true. And today I'm going to show you in the scriptures that not one time did Jesus violate the law of Moses. Make sure you stay tuned.
You are listening to the Divorced Christian Podcast Show with your host and teacher, Darius Good. He is the senior pastor of Bible Gospel Center and founder of Good Treasure Ministries. He is the author of the books Unlocking Godly Wisdom and The Divorced Christian. For more information, visit the website at thedivorcedchristian.com. And now, here's your host, Darius Good.
Thank you for joining us on today. You're listening to the Divorced Christian Podcast Show. My name is Darius Good. I am the senior pastor of Bible Gospel Center located in Connecticut. This platform was built for Christians who have experienced divorce, and we address theology. We address bad doctrine on the subject of divorce. And just to be blunt, most of the teachings, or actually all the teachings I've heard on divorce are entirely made up. They are built on a misunderstanding of Jewish culture, Jewish laws. And so when you are dismissive of a people group and their laws and their culture and their traditions, then you draw conclusions that when you sit down with the people, they're going to say to you, you made that up. Where'd you get that from? And so I began studying Judaism back in 2021. And it's been an interesting journey being a Christian pastor. It opened my eyes up to a lot of teachings in the Bible that have been inaccurate, that I've been taught from my youth, especially like in Sunday school. The explanation, the stories, the details, they've been altered. And it's a Christian version of the Bible. It's a Christian version of Judaism, and it's very, very inaccurate. And so as I sat down to understand the Old Testament better, I've studied Jewish writings. I highly encourage you to pick up a Jewish encyclopedia. The Jewish encyclopedia is free. If you go on the website, thedivorcedchristian.com, I have links to all the sources. You can read the Jewish encyclopedia. I think you can go to jewishencyclopedia.com and just type in different words. I sit and I just read to better understand the Old Testament and the scriptures. And it has completely opened up a complete different understanding of the writings of Paul, the writings of Jesus Christ, or the Gospels as they reveal Christ to us. And let me tell you this, because I keep hearing these teachings of late of how the teachings of Paul contradict the teachings of Jesus Christ. This is insanity. There is no contradiction between the teachings of Paul and the teachings of Christ. I better understood once I began studying Judaism, because we've always taught that Christianity is built on Judaism, and yet we teach all these contradictions. Jesus contradicted the law. Paul contradicted the law, and it's not true. It's built on Judaism. Judaism is the foundation of Christianity. So they have to align. There cannot be any contradictions between the two. And so I'm actually currently working on a book that deals with the perpetual covenants. There are 4 perpetual covenants in the Bible that God made that are critical to understanding the Christian faith. And so I hope to have this book out soon. Highly encourage you to pick up my book, The Sermon on the Mount. I'm going through the teachings of Jesus through the Jewish perspective. It's completely different than what I've heard. As a pastor's son, as a pastor, when ministers teach on the Sermon on the Mount, I'm like, you're making it up. It is, our teachings are historically inaccurate, and they're culturally inaccurate. And so as I began learning the culture and what would a Jew heard if he had heard Jesus make that statement, the information that I found and uncovered, and I wouldn't even say uncovered. This information is blatantly out there, but I just compiled it all together. So the link is in today's episode. If you're interested in grabbing that book, The Sermon on the Mount, grab the book, The Loophole. I'm going to teach from this book on today. The Loophole explains what led to a massive amount of adulterous marriages in Israel. And this is what the church gets confused. Our definition of an adulterous marriage is not a marriage after a divorce. That's not the definition in Israel. They had a definition for an adulterous marriage. And that's what Jesus is talking about when he makes his statements of a woman that's been put away entering into a marriage with another man. So it's important that we don't dismiss the Israel's culture and Israel's traditions and Israel's laws, because this is what Jesus was talking about. It's our Christian American ignorance that has brought us to this place, and all of these teachings are wrong. So I highly encourage you to pick up my book, The Loophole. Pick up the book, The Sermon on the Mount. And if your marriage is kind of on the cuff, if you're currently married and you're tuning in because either you like the information or you're debating what you should do with your marriage. Should you get divorced or remain married? I have a brand new book that's available called The Marriage Pillars. And we identify pillars in the marriage that are critical and essential to having a strong, healthy, fulfilling marriage. So I encourage you to pick that book up. The link is in the notes as well. You can actually read the first 6 chapters of this book on the website. The website address is IamMarriageMaterial.com. The link is in the notes, and you can find it on my website, DariusGood.com. Let's jump in today. I want to deal with this subject of Jesus never violating the law of Moses. And so what they've taught is in the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus came and began providing either clarity. I heard this teaching. One says clarity. So now we're going to go deeper and explain God's true intentions of giving the law. As if for the last 5,000 years, men didn't know this. They didn't know God's true intentions, so God waited till Jesus to come to reveal that. That's not true. Another teaching is that there was teachings or laws that Moses had in place that Jesus didn't like. So Jesus was correcting those laws. That means he was changing it. And so that means the statement that Jesus made that I did not come to change or to abolish the law would mean that, I don't know, they create a whole different explanation of why Jesus made that statement. But none of it's true. And so I, once again, highly encourage you to pick up my book, The Sermon on the Mount. But Jesus did not alter. He did not change. He did not focus on the inward. That's another teaching that the law focused on the external. Jesus is now focused on internal, dealing with lust, putting limitations on divorce. None of this is true. None of it is true. And so just real quickly, the statement Jesus made regarding divorce, if a man put away a woman and that woman marries another man, the women that were put away in Israel had the status of aguna, A-G-U-N-A-H. Please look that Hebrew word up, aguna, A-G-U-N-A-H. Any Google search will give you the information that these women were trapped in their marriages and could not remarry. So a woman that was put away could not remarry until she received her bill of divorcement or proof of her husband's death. And so many women in Israel died in this state, unable to remarry, because if they remarried, being a guna, meaning she's still legally married to another man, that means the marriage she entered into would now be an adulterous marriage. And this woman would be married to 2 men. And so this was a violation of the law of Moses. And what's crazy is this is a violation of U.S. laws. A woman cannot be married to 2 men in America. That's called polyandry, and it's not lawful in the U.S. And so their laws are very similar to ours, but they use different terminology. But the reason I'm highlighting this is because all of the teachings are based on this concept that Jesus changed the law. So as I sit down with ministers, we discuss this particular subject, and they explain things to me, I'm saying, no, that's not historically accurate. Oh, Jesus said a woman, if she puts away her husband, so if a woman divorces her husband, whoa, slow down. That is not historically accurate. A woman could not divorce her husband. Not in Israel, according to the law of Moses. The man was required to put the law or the bill of divorcement into the woman's hand. So women were not permitted to put the bill of divorcement into the man's hand. That's not me reading the scriptures and trying to understand what I'm reading. And that's what I get accused of a lot. But it's not true. I'm not reading the scriptures, trying to have understanding and then drawing a conclusion based on the words that are written on the page. I have read through encyclopedias, through Jewish writings. I've sat down with Jewish rabbis. And we're going to have a rabbi on very soon. He's going to be on the podcast show where I can ask him questions so we have a better understanding of the Jewish faith and Jewish culture, Jewish laws. But I have not made any of this stuff up. If you sit and talk to any Jewish person regarding the information that I'm providing to you, they will make you aware that everything that I'm saying is entirely true. When I had my meeting with the rabbi and I went through all my notes and teachings on divorce, he was like, well, that's true, and that's true, and that's true. And I went through ketubah, the Aguna crisis. I went through all these things as a part of their culture. He's like, that's true. All that is true. Everything you said. He says, you have a very good understanding of our people, of our culture. And so it's very important that we understand these things because the church has drawn conclusions that are very inaccurate. And we've taught it with fervency and confidence. And it's been tremendous error. And so Jesus never violated the law of Moses. Never violated the law. He didn't make any changes to the law of Moses. So even to make the change, and let's use this example that's been taught forever, that Jesus said you can only get divorced for adultery, then that would be a change to the law of Moses. Because the law of Moses did not put a limitation and say you can only get divorced for adultery. So now for Jesus to teach that would be a change to the law. Jesus did not change the law of Moses. He did not alter it in any way. And by the way, the scripture does not say that you can only get divorced for adultery. What it says is you can only get divorced for fornication. Jesus knew what he was saying because he used the word adultery and fornication in the same sentence. So when you look it up in the Hebrew, or in this case, in the Greek, look it up in the Greek, and you'll realize that Jesus is not using this word interchangeably. So now we like to say, well, it's for sexual behavior. No, that's not what fornication meant in Israel during Jesus' time. Highly encourage you to pick up my book, The Loophole, because I go through this in detail to explain how these words were used. And so this word fornication actually refers to another unlawful marriage in Israel. So if a woman that was a guna, that's currently married, now marries another man, that second marriage was called an adulterous marriage. Now, the exception was in the case of fornication, which was another unlawful marriage, which if you look the word up, you're going to find that it explains that a marriage that was considered a incestuous marriage, meaning that the lineage was too close. And this is outlined in Leviticus chapter 18 of all the kinships that were too close, that were forbidden in Israel from marrying one another. So the exception was fornication. Why was that an exception in comparison? Why these two unlawful marriages? That's the exception because they did not require a bill of divorcement. So in that case, if the relationship was too close, they basically just would put her away and the woman would go off and be another man's wife. But in the case of an adulterous marriage, because she's now married to two men, she was now required to have a bill of divorcement from both men, the first original husband, as well as the adulterous husband. So I go through all these details in this book, The Loophole. Highly encourage you to purchase this book, and you can read it for free if you go on the website. And that link is also in today's episode. So once again, Jesus, all these teachings are built on this violation of the law, violation of culture. And so what I want to do is provide one. I'm going to read two scriptures for you that forbid adding to the law of Moses. And I know Christians' mindset, Jesus could do whatever he wants. I just find that strange that Jesus or God will put laws in place and then sent Jesus to violate all the laws. So in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 2, it explains, you shall not add unto the word which I command you, neither shall you diminish aught from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you. So it was forbidden to add to the law or to diminish. Very interesting, because this is how Jesus began his sermon in the Sermon on the Mount, where he said in Matthew chapter 5 that anyone that was teaching people to break the law, to do or to break the least of these commandments in the law of Moses, they shall be least in the kingdom of heaven. Interesting, because that statement by Jesus aligns with the law of Moses here in Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 2. You cannot diminish it and you cannot add to the commandments. And then we turn around and say, but Jesus added to the commandments or he made changes. That's not true. Here's a second law, Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 32, where it states, what things soever I command you, observe to do it. Thou shalt not add thereto, nor diminish from it. Saying the same thing. Interesting, because Jesus rebuked to the Pharisees in Mark chapter 7. So if you go to Mark chapter 7, between verses 6 and 13, as Jesus is rebuking the Pharisees, what did he rebuke them for? He said, you reject the commandment of God that you may keep your own tradition, making the word of God of none effect through your tradition. Now, the mistake is the church has taught that the tradition that Jesus is talking about is the law of Moses. And that is not true. Jesus is saying they created traditions outside of the law of Moses. So that's what they were keeping. They're not actually keeping the law. And the Bible actually explains to us some of these traditions. So Jesus was very clear. He made one statement that you require men to wash their hands before they eat. You will not find that law in the law of Moses. So this was a tradition of man that was created that they were forcing upon the people as if this was a religious requirement. And it wasn't. Another area that Jesus targeted, where he talked about how you began teaching that these men and women could go to the temple and they can pay an offering, a corbet. And in doing so, they are now released from the obligation of taking care of their parents. And Jesus said, you have violated the law of Moses, where it says to honor thy mother and thy father. You're not released from that responsibility because you gave a sacrifice or an offering to the temple. You still have an obligation, which helps us understand. Here's another manipulation in the church. Honor thy mother and father means you have to do whatever your parents tell you. And we teach that this is the law given to the children. They gave all these laws to the adults, but we have one law to our children. Honor thy mother and thy father. And that, once again, is a falsehood. That is not what the Bible states, and that's not how that law was upheld or observed in Israel. As Jesus explained it, that law was given to adults. It was a requirement of them taking care of their elderly parents. That responsibility fell on their shoulders, and in their society was not structured like ours. In America, if my parents become too old, there are homes that I can send them to. There's residencies that I can bring them to where they can get the help and the assistance that they have need of. But our society is not structured how it was in Israel. The responsibility of adult care or senior citizens' care fell on the adult children. So in my book, The Loophole, I'm going to read from page 45. And I list several scriptures in Matthew chapter 5, verse 31 and 32, as well as Matthew 19, verse 9, as well as Mark 10, 11 through 12. And I write out Jesus' statements regarding divorce. And then I explain that the conclusion drawn from Jesus' teachings is that divorce is no longer permitted for any cause. The only just cause for divorce, according to most interpretations of Jesus' words, is now adultery. However, Jesus did not use the word adultery. Those familiar with the Greek language know that Jesus used the term porneia, which means fornication, rather than the word moichao, which is the Greek word for adultery. Now, this distinction has sparked a massive debate regarding Jesus' reasoning for choosing this specific word. And some argue that Jesus' statements may have been directed towards the betrothal period rather than the actual marriage. So some are actually teaching that Jesus restricted divorce to the betrothal period or our engagement. And that's not true. According to the law of Moses, they had to get the divorce during the betrothal period because the woman had to sign the marriage contract, the ketubah, to become betrothed. When she signed that contract, she's now legally married, even though they did not have the actual wedding. The wedding would occur entirely a year later. But she is legally married to this man. So for them to end the betrothal, they have to go to court and she has to actually receive a bill of divorcement. That is Jewish customs, Jewish law and tradition. Now, I have had people try to dismiss this and say, well, that's their tradition, that's their law. No. Please slow down, because our Christian faith is based on this concept. We are betrothed to Jesus Christ. So it's the same thing as the Jewish woman. We're not married to Jesus yet. We're not the wife of Christ. We are the bride of Christ. He's not the groom. He's the bridegroom. So we are in the betrothal phase of marriage to Christ as the church. This means that Christianity is following the Jewish system, is using that as its basis. And this is the current church age that we're currently in. And Jesus made this statement that I shall come again. I got to go to prepare a place, and I shall come again so that where I am, you shall also be. This is the language of the husband who's just been betrothed to a wife that's going to go off and prepare the home to receive the wife. And he would return about a year later, at which point the marriage would occur. So marriage in Jewish culture is in two distinct parts, the Nishuan and the Kiddushan. Nowadays, they do it both together. But during the time of Jesus, it was a year apart. So yes, a divorce was required in order to end the betrothal. But Jesus was not putting limitations. And actually, he wasn't even talking about betrothal. In any of those statements, he never said anything about betrothal. So once again, the church is taking bits and pieces of Jewish culture and try to build law, try to build these standards for Christian living. And I'm like, it doesn't work that way. You got to understand the entire system. And then you can't throw it out, because then you got to throw out part of our Christian doctrine, that the church is betrothed to Christ, that the parable of the virgins, there was 5 foolish virgins, 5 wise virgins. That's based on the coming of the bridegroom. They have prepared themselves for marriage, but they're already betrothed. That means they're legally a wife to the bridegroom. So let's continue. It says some scholars point to the debate between Sage Hillel and Sage Shimei, who founded 2 distinct schools of thought within Judaism. These schools often disagree on various aspects of family law, including divorce. Some argue that Jesus was asked to weigh in on their differences, offering his own interpretation of the law. Now, growing up, I would hear this as the explanation of why Jesus made these statements in the first place. This debate between these 2 Jewish schools. What I'm explaining is that both arguments that are made are violations of the law. So there's a major issue with this interpretation and teaching as to why Jesus stated what he did. Every statement that is made violates the law of Moses. And Jesus explicitly stated, I did not come to abolish the law. So therefore, teachings that suggest Jesus was altering or changing the law regarding divorce would inherently contradict Jesus' own declaration and would imply that he sought to change the law of Moses in some way. There are no examples in the scriptures where the scribes, the Sadducees or the Pharisees accused Jesus of changing, violating, or abolishing the law of Moses. We don't have any examples. On many occasions, they tried to trap Jesus in debates to bring charges against him. But despite their legal arguments and attempts, Jesus left them in silence every single time. All of Jesus' answers to his opponents were rooted in the law of Moses, often quoting it directly or in his defense. The charges brought against Jesus were based on his declaration that he would destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days, as mentioned in his trial if you go to Matthew chapter 26. However, his accusers were unable to provide any proof that he taught anything contrary to the law of Moses. Jesus' statements were conclusive truths that did not violate or alter the law of Moses. In fact, they addressed growing trends in Israel that were violations of the law. So in this book, my book, The Loophole, we examine the law of adultery, we examine the law of fornication so that we have a better understanding of the law of Moses. I'm telling you, it's so important that we understand Jewish law and Jewish culture. Thank you for joining us on today. Until next time, be blessed.
You've been listening to the Divorced Christian Podcast Show with your host, Darius Good. This was a Good Treasure Ministries production. Darius is the senior pastor of Bible Gospel Center, and he is the author of the book, The Divorced Christian. To learn more about this book and other books written by Darius, or to listen to other episodes of our podcast show, visit our website today at thedivorcedchristian.com. We pray that today's episode has brought revelation, understanding, and healing. Please like, share, and subscribe to our podcast show. And until next time, be blessed.